and she's also an award winner filmmaker and a trained journalist. On my right side, Jonas Zemene. Jonas Zemene is on my far left side, sorry. He's a practicing lawyer and an adjunct professor at the Addis Ababa University Law School. He's a former investigation officer at the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. And on Jonas. And on my right side here, Getan Haptamu. He's from the Federal Attorney General Office. He is the Legal Research Drafting and Dissemination Director. And Solomon Getachew, he's also from Federal Attorney General Office, from Legal Research Drafting and Dissemination Directorate. Please welcome the panelists. After this brief introduction, I'm directly proceeding to the topic at hand, which is false information, misinformation, and hate speech. So I want to start from Jonas about these three important concepts and how we need to understand them, how we need to better understand them in terms of framing this whole concept of hate speech, false information and misinformation, and what's the relationship between these two ideas and how prevalent are they in the context of Ethiopia and Africa. Please, Jonas.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. As he introduced me, I'm Jonas Zemene, ex-investigation. I'm Jonas Zemene, and ex-investigation officer for the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. I'm a practitioner lawyer and part-time instructor from Addis Ababa University. Before I begin with the definition of hate speech and misinformation or disinformation, I need to begin with the right to freedom of expression. As we all know, all the bills of rights, all the international covenants or conventions have recognized the right to freedom of speech and expressions in different forms. Many international instruments have recognized so, have given a number of weight for this right or freedom of speech and expression. Without freedom of speech and expression, we all know that we cannot achieve or think of the democratic governance. But this right is not an absolute right, as you all know. It can be limited in different grounds. This is not an absolute right. Most of the international conventions have come up with a number of grounds whereby the right to freedom of expression is limited or restricted. So far as it has a legitimate purpose, prescribed by the law, and so far as it's proportional, in order to achieve the legitimate aim of those elements illustrated under the international conventions for the sake of protecting the national security, public health, public order. This right is going to be limited or restricted on certain grounds prescribed by the law. One of the ground whereby the freedom of expression is going to be limited or restricted is it's hate speech or misinformation or disinformation. Even if, in spite of the fact that it's the word hate speech or disinformation is is known all over the world, it's hard to come up with a universally accepted definition on the concept about hate speech, whereas the Black's Law Dictionary defined as an abusive or threatening speech or writing that express prejudice against a particular group, especially on the basis of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When such kinds of speech which is abusive on the ground of sex or religion or sexual orientation, which is a ground to limit the freedom of expression as the enshrined the international conventions and different legislative institutions. Misinformation laws, misinformation and hate speech are, which are the ground for the restrain these rights. It's misinformation is just like hate speech, just propagating or it's speaking information which is going to be false or fake with a need to create violence in the society, which is called misinformation. Today, it's a prevalent problem, a rampant problem all over the world. Especially, it's a prevalent problem for Ethiopia. Many Ethiopians are internally displaced. For instance, according to the Human Rights Watch report in 2018, in the first half of 2018, more than 1.4 million have been displaced from their places, whereby their human rights are grossly violated because of hate speech or misinformation that have been broadcasted by the social medias as well as the conventional medias. This makes the pressing agenda for Ethiopians to come up with a legal framework or a legislative which regulate the transmission of speeches or which regulates the transmission of ideas or thoughts, and in order to restrict the transmission of hate speech and the misinformations. On this ground, the Ethiopian government has come up with a new draft specifically governing hate speech and misinformation in order to avoid the evil consequence of the hate speech in parallel with the freedom of speech and the other international human rights enshrined by the Ethiopia. The details on this particular statute on the hate speech and disinformation of Ethiopian legal regime is going to be presented by my colleague. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, Jonas. Just as a reminder, I'm going to give 5 to 7 minutes for each one of you to reflect on this topic. So please be mindful of the short time we have. So again, thank you for your presentation, Jonas. Right. I'm going to proceed to Nancy before we make a deep dive into the Ethiopia case study and what kind of legal intervention, its content, scope, and all that. But I want to hear something from Nancy about this, to reflect on the issue of hate speech, false information, and misinformation in the context of Zambia and your personal encounter as being part of a very important media association.
Okay, technology. As the only Southern African here, and the only woman, can I have like 8 minutes instead?
Okay, fine.
Okay, well, in Zambia, generally, I think we've seen a lot of websites and Facebook groups pop up, and some of them generally do have news, but a lot of them do fuel hate speech. And there's a lot of misinformation that's really propagated online, and it's hard to sort of follow up or sort of have any recourse because you don't know who's running these pages. There's Facebook pages now that are meant to expose people sleeping with people's husbands, and there's never really any verification mechanism or any mechanism where you can sue a media house for defamation. There are no frameworks in place, basically. We have, in the past, the government used to, I think that was like a couple of years back, the government had shut down some websites. That hasn't really been happening lately. The government is trying to push for a cyber bill, which I think for most people from SADC know is like copy and pasted like literally across the region. They're trying to claim that it's going to stop cyberbullying, it's going to stop misinformation, but the nature of the bill in itself is very restrictive. So for a lot of people in civil society, for a lot of people activists, it's sort of trying to find, sort of sit down at a table and figure out how we can control misinformation and hate speech without letting the government step in, because I think everybody knows once you let the government come up with laws, it's just chaos. So generally what is going on is a lot of Zambians use Facebook. There's some that use Twitter, but a lot of media houses are based on Facebook. I mean, you can call them media houses, but it's a lot of troll accounts, it's a lot of Facebook pages, a lot of Facebook groups that basically, like for me as an actress, there's some media houses who will just put up a picture with a caption and they know that there's going to be like 1,000 comments under that thread bullying you, you know, saying a lot of nasty things. And for them, it's clickbait. Look, they're advertising, right? So the more people come on that page, the more revenue they have. So I think there needs to be a sort of responsibility on the part of us journalists and bloggers as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Nancy.
Very brief.
Our next panelist is Getan Haptamu from the Federal Attorney General. So actually Nancy mentioned something interesting from the Zambia, what was the name of the bill? The cyber bill. So yeah, I mean there is this conventional understanding that whenever a certain law is put out to govern a certain sector in Africa, it seems like there is peer learning among African countries. So in your reflection, probably maybe something, one of the important issues that you can factor in is, has the Ethiopian government looked into any African experience in trying to draft a hate speech act? If you can tell us if you know something about it in your presentation. But the other most important thing is, since both of you are from the Federal Attorney General's office, I heard there is this very interesting scoping study that has been done by the government, commissioned by the government to understand the problem of hate speech and its prevalence in Ethiopia. Could you please say something about that one as well? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just my name is Getana. Just I am from the Federal Attorney General Office. I am Senior Public Prosecutor and a Coordinator for Legal Research and Study Department under the Legal Research Drafting and Disseminating Directorate. Just to start with hate speech, you know, as my colleagues before says, the definition of hate speech are stated in different places in international instrument, in African charters, or in even in our different laws and proclamations. So just there is a protected characteristics that should be protected, not to say something on that area based on that protected characteristic and based on the definition internationally or on different instruments stated. The government or our office was started to our office conducted a research hate speech in Ethiopia. To see, the objective of the research was to know the status of hate speech in the country, and to see the solution forward. Mostly, as we know, Ethiopia is a multicultural country. There are different religions, many Muslims, many Christians, many Waqefatas and others, many diversity. The same thing, more than 80 ethnic or nationalities and the peoples live in this country. Always there is also the transformation or the change of governments, the societal development, the economic development, which grows through the times, and even the opening up of internet or using of internet, different social medias are coming to grow up. So we try to conduct or cover the researches around almost about 6 regions among 9 and 2 city administrations, and we are going to collect different data based on the objectives. Our question was, is there hate speech? First, we are asking the respondents their understanding about hate speech, and if there is any types of hate speech, and by what means that the hate speech is promulgated in different area. So based on the research that we are conducted, most hate speech, as there is speeches in different parts of the country through the means of different instruments based on ethnic or what we call racial backgrounds, based on religions, and even based on political opinion, based on sexes or genders. As some the speech, as we know, hate speech is one means of hate speech is a speech by itself. It is an speech, but it has unhindered senses to pass on the other persons. Finally, we should have to protect it. We should have to protect the hate speech as much as possible. It needs interference of different concerning bodies. Maybe one is maybe enacting law, or another way, before enacting law, there are many different options. For example, the social media itself should regulate itself by its own platforms. There are different individuals who have many followers, or in Facebook or in Twitter, creating an organization or a forum of social media together, and controlling and developing the way dissemination of information and teaching the society. If passes above this, maybe enacting a law is necessarily, because there are different other African countries, such as South Africa or Kenyan's laws, which have hate speech legislations. So based on that, and based on our current or based on the Ethiopian situation, actual situation, now the law is going on. The law is drafting, is prepared, and for the governments. Now, this is all what I have. Maybe my colleagues add some other things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Getachew. Probably during the Q&A session, we'll come back to you to ask more questions for clarification. Now I proceed to Solomon Getachew from the Federal Attorney General Office. to say something about the draft hate speech legislation. Please, Salam.
Thank you, Sefa. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Solomon Getachew. I am from Federal Attorney General, Legal Research, Drafting and Disseminating Directorate. Just a lot has been said by my colleagues about the title of discussion, hate speech, false and misinformation. As everybody of you knows, Ethiopia is a big and a beautiful country with a population of more than 100 million, having different culture and religion. At the same time, those people has different claims, which is competing claims of resources, land, history, blah blah. These differences are, as has been said by different writers, difference is beauty, at the same time it's unity. If we look this room, we are from different background, different countries, we have different religion, different race, but we are attending the workshop in a nice way. The same is true for Ethiopia. Even if we are different in culture, in religion, even if we are too much in number, this may not be the cause for conflict and social unrest. But some activists and responsible persons, activists, propagandists, use this diversity and the differences as a cause of social unrest, conflicts, and cause of different attacks. So the act of such activists or propagandists needs to be regulated. Unless we regulate such acts, the result is very devastating and dangerous. As has been said before, we have undertaken some study, and as has been said before, more millions of people are displaced internally, thousands of people killed since two or last year. So human beings are suffering now and then because of hate speech and misinformation. So as a government, the main responsibility of government is to secure peace and order of its society, its inhabitants, at the same time to create conducive working and living environment to its citizen. So to undertake this responsibility, we conclude or we draft a hate speech law, hate speech and misinformation law. If you think of cause or results of hate speech, we can, what we all know, we can go to Germany, the Nazi German killing of 6 million Jews because of none, we can say, because killing human being can't justified by anything. You can go in Africa to Rwanda. What has been happened between Tutsi and the Hutu brothers and the sisters because of hate speech spread and disseminated among themselves. If we think the cause of such happening is, it's nonsense, or we can say, because killing of human being can't be justified by anything. So hate speech and misinformation need to be regulated, unless its result is devastating. Even from the perspective of human rights, always when we think of hate speech and misinformation, the main thing that comes to my mind is the right of self-expression or freedom of expression. Not only that, the right of equality, the right of freedom from being discriminated, which are recognized by international instruments. So to protect, to strike balance between freedom of expression and right of equality and the right of being discriminated, we need to regulate hate speech. This is why we are enacting or drafting this law. The law is a zero draft, is not is just to the extent of just we draft the law, the draft, then the concerned organs or peoples participated and give their idea on the draft law, then we submit to the Council of Ministers. So just to regulate such hate speech and misinformation, we need to assess Ethiopian laws. What we are going to do first is, if we, since freedom of expression is the issue of human rights, Ethiopia is signatory to international conventions. If you go to such international conventions, for example, UDHR, which is enacted 1949, ICCPR, and other covenants permit the restriction of freedom of expression. At the same time, the respect or recognition of right of equality and the right of being discriminated. What is hate speech done is, what is speech result is being discriminated. So if there is discriminatory or hateful speech, the targeted group will be discriminated, undermined, or targeted to a certain attack. So it's bypass or infringe the right of equality and the right of being discriminated. So international instruments allow the restriction of such rights. At the same time, our constitution allow Article 29 of Article 29 of our constitution allow the restriction of right of freedom for the sake of right of others. So considering this in mind, we go to our other laws which may probably regulate hate speech. We have criminal law, we have cyber crime law, we are computer and information proclamation. All these laws have some articles of regulating hate speech probably, but one of the main principle of criminal law is not to create crime by analogy. So we need to have explicit law. Standing from this, we obliged to draft this hate speech and misinformation law. The title of the draft law is Prevention and Suppression of Hate Speech and Misinformation in Ethiopia. Just as has been said before, hate speech has no internationally accepted definition. Just to restrict the unbiased or abuse that may result in executing the law, we must expect to define the term hate speech and misinformation, dangerous misinformation, for the purpose of this proclamation in Ethiopian context. According to this draft for this proclamation, hate speech is defined as intentionally dissemination of speech that depicts as evil, demean, threaten, encourage discrimination or attack based on race, religion, sex, minority, and the like. A person who disseminates such kind of speech through any means of communication can be criminally liable for committing hate speech. The other that we are doing to what we are doing to regulate is the dissemination of dangerous misinformation. For the purpose of this proclamation, the meaning of dangerous misinformation is a definition of a speech to a public by means of communication which is substantially or by its mere content which is false but is capable of causing attack or causing public unrest in the community can be considered as a false misinformation. Just to strike balance or not to restrict such rights unfairly, we provide some exceptions to this definition. One is if the speech is based on scientific inquiry, it may not be considered as an hate speech, because we need to encourage and promote scientific findings. Because of this, if the speech is based on scientific finding, it can't be considered as an hate speech. The other is if the speech is balanced and accurate report, it cannot be considered as an hate speech. We provide these exceptions just to strike balance and not to limit the right of freedom of expression unfairly. The other is just to free the political space. If the political speech and the critique in an acceptable way in a democratic society, that by itself considered as is not considered as an hate speech. Also, for dangerous misinformation, this article is mainly for bloggers, writers, and those who have different followers in social media. If they try their best to reach on the truth, they may not be considered as an dangerous misinformation. Just to use time, the other is a penalty clause that may not be necessary for this room. The other is just this proclamation puts responsibility on social media platform providers. Just social media platform providers required to take out or take information report notice when they get that, just to strike out or take out those communication from the platform. And the other is Ethiopian Broadcasting Corporation, just to support and create awareness on such issue. This is a short presentation of what the draft looks like. Thank you.
Thank you, Solomon. Now I open the floor for discussion, but before that, I'll take 1 minute to actually pose some questions for each of our panelists. One thing is of course, the first question is for Jonas. So when you reflect on questions forwarded hate speech, false information, and misinformation. Once we gather a question from the floor, please reflect on this question as well. And for Nancy, what's the role and contribution of media associations or blogger associations like you're a member to, in terms of mitigating this kinds of problem? Because your kind of intervention can be considered as one of the key set of non-legal approach towards dealing with this problem. The other question I have is for Gaetane. So you talked about this research commissioned by, it sounds like it's a national research which covered most part of the regions, right? So how prevalent, probably in terms of empirical evidence, how prevalent is this problem? What does your finding suggest about hate speech, and in terms of what content and what kinds of channels of dissemination and communications have been identified as a contributing factor to this problem of hate speech, false information, and misinformation. One quick question I have for Solomon is, can you briefly reflect on the safeguard clauses as part of the hate speech? Safeguard clauses, for instance, you know, because you said academic research or speech that's done for academic purpose is not considered as hate speech, right? What other safeguard clauses are applicable to other kinds of issues? What other issues are also given this kind of protection other than academic work? Then, in addition to that, many critics argue that the penalty in the draft Hate Speech Act it's a little bit harsh. So what are the parameters that you guys take into consideration when you draft a penalty? Is there any sentencing guideline for people who are accused of committing such kind of crime? And what's the justification for that kind of harsh kind of penalty? So now I open the floor for question. Yes, please. Sorry. Yeah, that one.
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I'm asking an excuse. My voice is not right. Excuse me. So my questions are directly related to those two persons from the General Autonomy. And I will frame my questions and concerns from the point of view of blogging. The first question and my concern is concerning the research process. I mean, the research data conducted by the Authority General. I have a concern on the reliability and the validity of the research. How valid and reliable the research is. Because I raise this question, the same organization or the same office is doing the research rather than an independent researcher, and at the same time drafting the Hate Speech Act. There is a conflict of interest. So how do you address this issue? This is my first question. And the second question is, what is the intent of the government to rush into hate speech law rather than reforming the anti-terrorist law? Because that law is still curbing people's freedom, especially the freedom of expression in online activity concerning political dissent and everything. And the third issue is that as a person mentioned, the definition of hate speech is too controversial. There are a lot of interpretations and meanings. For example, what does evil means? There are a lot of interpretations. What's dangerous means? There are a lot of interpretations. So how this Speech Act will have an impact on the freedom of expression, internet freedom and freedom of expression is a real concern, and how you answer this question. Thank you.
Thank you. Please mention your name and your affiliation, And I only give like 1 minute for each questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Hassan. I'm from Somalia. I have a combined question. As we are aware, internet freedom is promoted public participation in political process, and also it's promote increase access to information. Somehow it's facilitate spread of misinformation and fake news. So how can we balance for this? And is there any ways we can balance public interest and this fake and hate speech and fake news? Also, is there any ways we can promote free internet and instead of we restrict it on internet?
Thank you.
Okay, my name is Omar. I am from Nigeria. So I have a question for everyone on that table. I work with an organization called the Nigerian Girl Guide Association. So we encourage women to report gender-based violence and harmful cultural practices online. So it happens that most of the time, these women report these cultural practices against them, and we have a lot of people that comes out from that culture, from that tradition, and say, hey, you are talking against our culture. This is a hate speech. You are talking against this we are used to. This is our tradition. This is a hate speech. So my question now is, who defines what a hate speech is? Because when I'm talking about what happened to me when I came to your cultural domain, I came online to rant about it and know this is what is happening, and those people came around like a kind of to counter that and say it is a hate speech against us. And actually, it was my experience that I want the world to know about. So who defines what a hate speech is?
Thank you. I'm Zaipo from Zimbabwe. I just have a contribution. I think it's very crucial that we acknowledge that in as much as we talk about the freedom of expression, the rights go with responsibilities, because people, when they go online and they practice that right, it actually at times provokes. So I feel we need, as we're talking about that, it's very unfortunate that when it comes to member states, I'll give an example of the southern region, SADC. Most, these past years, that's when we're now talking about the cyber crime and cyber security bills, because all this time it was linked to information communication ministry. And you'll discover that the government is actually the perpetrator. I'll give you, coming from Zimbabwe, when you talk about you say misleading and false information, social media breaks the news for us. And like all typical government representatives, if you talk about fuel prices, it's something which you say that's false information. But the next day, that thing does happen. So I feel in as much as we're trying to monitor specifically the social media space, which is the one that is flooded with hate speech and also false information, we need to acknowledge its role in development in communities. Because the issue that I have, my other brother, the lawyer, was talking about, there's a treaty. The challenge we have with treaties, conventions, agreements, and whatever the boys club sign, is that it's not legally binding. So how do we come to a point where, as citizens, because it's one thing where citizens can provoke each other through hate speech, but you also have an issue of the government itself being the perpetrator. So how do we bring ourselves to account while the government also is a perpetrator? Thank you.
Thank you. One last question over there. Then I'll open the floor for next round of questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Adora from Nigeria. I just wanted to ask, how are you working with some of the big social media platforms, especially with like regulating fake accounts? Because we know that sometimes when people want to say certain things online, they would want to hide under the cover of anonymity, create a fake account, and then spread fake news. So is there any way you're looking at working with some of the big social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and the rest?
Thank you. So, panelists, please reflect on the questions, and I'll give you 3 minutes each, and please try to finish on time.
To respond one question here from Somali. I want to forward my opinion on that. I think he asked for us, how could you compromise access of information with the regulation of hate speech? I think this is your question. That's why, you know, access to information and freedom of expression is, it's a wide right. It's a principle. Everybody has a right to freely express his opinion, his thoughts, as he wish. So far as it's compatible with the grounds on which these rights which going to be limited. Everybody can enjoy freedom. I mean, enjoy internet or other medias in order to express his thoughts, in order to get access to information, in order to transmit whatever he wishes, so far as it's compatible with respecting or respecting the rights and freedoms of others, and compatible with those grounds whereby freedom of expression or access to information is going to be limited. That's what we are going to talking about. Since freedom of expression or access to information encompasses two lines of obligations on the government. On the one hand, which imposes positive obligation on the government in order to interfere with the rights of the others or freedom of expression when there is a legitimate ground to do so. On the other hand, when there is no legitimate ground to do so, it obliges the state to refrain from interfering from the freedom of expression, so that we are going to compromise in this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Solomon. Nancy.
I'm going to answer your first question when you said what's the role of associations. So basically, like for Zambia Bloggers Network, we're a membership organization. For Zambia Media Women Association, we're also a membership-based organization. So for us, it's holding our members accountable, basically. It's protecting them and also holding our own members accountable. So we have like a lot of trainings, you know, because we understand, like for the bloggers, the Zambia Bloggers Network, some of our members are not journalists. So we periodically have like training sessions just to sort of amp their skills, you know. So that's what we're doing. About 4 months ago in Zambia, we had a 2-day conference where different media houses came. So that was online media, private media, state-owned media. The government had issued an ultimatum basically saying, you guys have to sit and decide whether you want the government to regulate or you want self-regulation. So, I mean, it was quite unanimous. We all voted for self-regulation. So what that has done is now we have a set of rules, basically, pertaining to each different sector of the Zambian media, whether it's online media, traditional, state-owned media, like guidelines, basically, that were chosen by the journalists and by the bloggers at that conference. So for us, that's really a landmark. But then, you see, you can only do so much. You can't regulate people, for instance, who are not signed on to any association, you know what I mean? And if you don't know who owns a Facebook page or a website that's malicious, you can't really do much about it. I don't know if I can address her question. really, I think the thing about hate speech is it's hurtful, you know? It's hurtful based on someone's gender, based on someone's tribe, based on someone's race. To answer your question, those ladies, the same practice that you were speaking out against, what you did was not hate speech. You know, I think they were just affected because you called out a harmful practice that is rooted in patriarchy, and for a lot of people it's like, oh, it's tradition, but that was not hate speech. I think when somebody posts something hurtful, I think you can really tell, you know what I mean? If somebody puts up a picture and slut shames somebody, that's hurtful, you know, so yeah.
Thank you, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. I try to respond on some pointers that raised for me. Just the research or the survey that was conducted by our institution was, you know, as we know, Ethiopia has 9 regions. Among the 9, we try to cover 6 of them under 2 city administration. Just we use the snowball systems, you know, it's difficult. The place where more than 100 million people live to contact or to talk with all. And you know, almost about 400 persons are participated in the questionnaires and interviews and focal group discussion. Even we use different sources, internet, even YouTube or Facebook, is what was written on social medias. And even there was a research that was made by some individuals, I forget his name. The research was about hate speech. It asks and it requires the government to enact hate speech laws, because at that time most of the papers will say most of the source for the hate speech is the government itself. So having a law on hate speech makes the government to refrain from his acts. So there was, on the question, do we need hate speech laws, is obvious, yes, we need. No one's responds in negative ways, but the way enact and the way of implementation may be disputable. This is the research that we done. Another question is, you know, even there was a resolution made by United Nations Human Rights Councils, just as Ethiopia needs to have hate speech legislations, as before we try to raise the problems was happened based on hate speech. There was different problems that was happened in our country. So that's also one point. Just how we can balance hate speech and public interests with the free internet societies. It's obvious free internet is needed for everywhere because it has much more important and it's useful, we know that. But every free internet, not only internet, every freedom should have to its own limitation, because to the extent of the others' right, to the extent of public orders, so that is a gap between legislation and freedoms. So I think this one, so.
Yeah, thank you. Salam. You only have 3 minutes.
Okay, just question from my colleague from Ethiopia. Just what makes this law different from anti-terrorism law? There is a quite difference between anti-terrorism and this draft law. If you look at the anti-terrorism law, it has its own procedure laws with regard to collecting evidences, with regards to bail, remand. Not only this, with regard to presenting evidence to the court, it has its own procedures in a special way. This law only provide or set the substantive part of the substantive part of the laws. There is no a special procedure in this law. We use the normal procedure, civil criminal procedure law for the criminalizing this act. The main problem of the anti-terrorism law is one is the practice, the other is the procedure, not the definition is the other part mainly. So there are quite difference between the two. I know, I understand his fear because at the time of execution we may face challenges in identifying the problems and in presenting evidence. What constitutes hate speech? How can we reach the wrongdoer? Just this is what we done in collaboration with other professionals. As far as the definition is concerned, we are very much concerned not to limit unfairly the rights we are going to limit. For instance, every false information is not criminalized in this draft, only dangerous one. Not all false informations, but the dangerous one. That means the statement which is capable of causing violent conflict or attack to others, only dangerous one. At the same time, who define hate speech? The question raised from my sister. Just there are a number of definitions are given what constitutes hate speech is. Just to limit or to not to create confusion for the purpose of this exclamation and for the purpose of Ethiopian hate speech law, we define in this way. Then we present the way we define to the concerned organs. They give their opinion. Lecturers, political parties, competitors, all give their suggestion. Then we compile the suggestion. In that way, we define what hate speech constitutes for the context of Ethiopia. It may be different in another country.
I think 3 minutes.
Yeah. This is all about the safeguards are already provided in the draft. Everyone can see and suggest.
Yeah, maybe you can reflect on that question after we receive another round of questions. Here. Do we have the mic? Maybe you can start your question. Okay. Who's?
Right. I thank you very much.
Yeah, only 1 minute for 3 questions. 1 minute each, please. We're running out of time.
My name is Kofi Abua. I'm the General Secretary of the Ghana Journalists Association. I just want to make a point to reinforce what my colleague made about how journalists associations or unions can help address this issue. Using the example of where I come from, we also use a lot of education and training of our rank and file to enable them to do the right things, to be professional in their work. Apart from that, we also have a code of ethics that we use to regulate how we do our job. The challenge we have had is that because we operate a loose system, and there is no barrier for one to become a journalist, Anybody at all can find himself or herself in that space. And so it is not even about competence, it's about eloquence. If you are eloquent, the next day you are a journalist, or you are practicing as a journalist. So you may be a funeral announcer today, and tomorrow you are a news anchor. That has been the challenge. And then one doesn't have to be a member. It is not an obligation. So if you have a situation like that, it is difficult to control. And then one challenge we also face is about ownership. We have a constitutional provision that opens the door to everyone to own a media organization. And the experience and the problem we've been having of late is where you have politicians taking that space. And you know, when it is getting to election time, you have a lot of these things happening. And so that has also been a challenge. And once the Constitution allows
Thank you. I think we're running out of time.
Difficult to regulate that. Thank you.
Oh, the guy behind. Yeah. I'll get back to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Morisola Alaba. I work with Media Rights Agenda Nigeria. Somebody mentioned something about speech, somebody talking about a culture that is actually bad or does not contravene human rights, and you talking about it online, and somebody from that tribe comes to you and say that you are actually, it's hate speech. And someone mentioned, one of the panelists said, yes, it's not hate speech, I agree. But the thing about hate speech and offensive speech is that there's a really thin line. Offensive speeches and even insulting speeches are allowed under international instruments and others. But hate speech, it's a thin line. I want us to be very careful here as to who controls what hate speech is. I think the issue now is that we should start, if at all we want, yes, there has to be control over speech, and especially when it comes to hate speech. If at all there's going to be control, it has to have all stakeholders sit down and draft something out, because the internet has gone beyond one person owning it. It's for everybody. And if we put regulations, or if we now say, oh, our governments need to actually control it, then it becomes dangerous, because that's when you start seeing speeches that are things that are vague inside the law, and it really creates a lot of problems, because we also have it in Nigeria in our Cybercrimes Act, where we have things that are insulting. It says when you send a message that is insulting to somebody, you have committed a crime of cyber stalking. So who defines what is insulting? Who defines what message is annoying? So those kind of things, we need all stakeholders on board. If at all there is need for a law, which I agree there is, in order to make sure that it doesn't actually contravene human rights or violate any human right provision.
Okay, thank you. Please, only questions, and make the best use of our time. Only 1 minute each.
Hi, Jason Pielmeyer from the Global Network Initiative. My question is for Solomon, just very straightforward. You mentioned that the draft law will require social media operators to take down hate speech or misinformation, and I want to know if the government will have to go to a judge to adjudicate whether content meets the law before they can hold a social media platform accountable for failing to take it down, or whether the government will make those demands directly to the social media platforms, or whether the government will hold them accountable without any notice whatsoever, simply by determining that they have failed to take content down. So if you could clarify how the liability for the social media platforms would work, that would be very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Mbeyu Gertrude from the Kenyan Parliament.
Yeah, please 1 minute because the organizers are saying time is over.
2 questions. How does one differentiate between freedom of speech and expression against hate speech? 2, how does one measure the degree of hate speech to punishable by law? Thank you.
So maybe most of the questions seems to be forwarded to the 2 gentlemen here. Can I give you 1 minute each to reflect on the questions, as you can understand?
Had I not been mistaken, Facebook is about to open a branch here in Ethiopia, I think. I have this information because internet has been blocked last month. Then they come here and talk to the concerned officials, and they are about to open office here and to work in collaboration together. There is no criminal liability for these social media platform providers, but there is a duty imposed upon them. Just they are expected to undertake this duty. If not, yeah, just obvious what the government can do then. The other is what how can we differentiate insult, offensive speech, hate speech? As far as offensive and insult is concerned, we do have a criminal law which clearly have a specific feature. Hate speech has its own specific feature. It's different from insult and offensive speech. Hate speech is forwarded to group or a certain community or to a certain identified group based on their identification, that may be race or religion. The speech is to undermine that targeted group, not to individuals. Insult is to individuals. Hate speech is not to individuals. The coverage is different. The situation is different. The its outcome is different. As far as we didn't identify who can do this. If the government, we government officials can make hate speech in Ethiopia, even whoever he is, if he commit such crime, whether government official at a government capacity or individual, he is liable according to this law. We can't have any special law for government, and this is not to other individuals. Just as far as the balance is concerned, I think it has been answered by my colleague. What constitutes hate speech, freedom of expression has been already addressed by my colleague. I think these are the questions that I may address. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm being told by the organizers that time is over, but you can continue the discussion over tea break outside. So I would like to thank all the panelists for their insightful comments and discussion. Please allow me to thank them with a round of applause.